So this is really one of those reviews that I am going to find a difficult time staying on track for, mostly because this is one of those cases where you have a lot of trouble figuring out exactly where to start and then figuring out how to elaborate while staying on track and not tangenting too much. Today we're going to talk about the Langdon Tactical 92 Elite. If you were to look up basically any video ever on Langdon Tactical or the 92 series, you're likely to find something about Langdon Tactical, and every single big or medium-sized or small YouTuber on the planet essentially has a lot of really powerful and really positive things to say about this individual company. So having just done an M9A4 review and being over the moon about that pistol, I figured I may as well start the expectations and bar quite high, because the M9A4 in that video was a loaner. So if I was going to own one of these things, I was going to start in what I figured was the very best spot to pick up one of these guns. So we went to the website, we made sure that we didn't announce ourselves so that we didn't receive anything special or particular. Not that they would, because they don't really know who we are. But more than anything else, if I was going to do a review on this, I wanted to make sure that I just appeared as a run-of-the-mill customer to make sure that what we got from them was in fact just an off-the-rack air quotes product. So going to the website and not announcing ourselves, we ordered the 92 Elite RDO full-sized. I didn't get anything particularly special. All I really asked for was an RMR plate with rear sight to the rear, a trigger job, and that was essentially it. And here's the thing, this is why I personally think that first impressions videos are beyond useless and in some cases counterproductive. Because if I went on first impressions alone and if I didn't shoot this thing a whole lot, I would only have extremely positive things to say, and this entire video would essentially be Langdon Tactical propaganda. Matter of fact, I even said in community posts that if this goes well, this will be nothing but Beretta propaganda, featuring Langdon Tactical. But instead of just leaning on that, we decided to subject this to our standard opening review of 6,000 rounds, all the testing procedures and whatnot included. And the biggest thing to say about that is this ain't propaganda. Because over the course of this 6,000 round review, 5,000 rounds of it is very much positive. You'll notice that I said 5. The review itself took us down a few rabbit holes that I wasn't expecting to go down, and frankly at the end of this, I have a few things to say about Langdon that may not be the kindest thing that anyone has ever heard. But like everything else, we're going to talk about feature set and performance, starting from nose to tail, followed by a summary of things that I've more or less put together right at the end. But with all due introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and get to work here. So while we're talking about feature set and performance, it is worth it to note that the 92 Elite is a collaborative endeavor by Beretta and Langdon Tactical themselves. Now, the DNA, or the bones, of the 92 Elite is a Vertex slide with an M9A1 frame. So frankly, if nothing else was even done to this pistol, it would still be pretty solid. But of course, Langdon Tactical has made a lot of improvements, at least in concept, to the overall design. Most conspicuous of which is the RDO plate to be provided the real estate to even mate itself to the slide, so a bunch of internal components in said slide have had their dimensions changed to simply allow for this plate, which is different compared to the modern 92X or M9A4 RDO systems, in which standard 92 components are still in the slide. Now, while this RDO system from Langdon did show up before the RDO system from Beretta themselves, it's worthy to note that the difference between the two is, well, frankly, one is able to use standard Beretta parts, and the Langdon Berettas do not. And while the logistics issue in and of itself is not huge, because Langdon Tactical is huge, it's still worthy to note that Beretta themselves is much larger, so the internal components for the Beretta are gonna be much more available for the present-day RDO guns that are not made by Langdon Tactical. Now, in this particular case, I have an RMR cut one with the rear sight to the rear, and I actually have quite a few things to say about this. The very first thing that I have to mention is that the individual posts that you put RMR screws into are not the same thread pitch as standard Trijicon RMR screws. And to me, it's a little baffling that an update wasn't made, because the individual screws that Langdon Tactical is using are in fact a bit thinner, and the simple fact that the screws themselves, and the simple fact that the posts themselves are independent of the actual plate, and the screw holes themselves do not actually make make contact with the slide at any point, it doesn't make sense to me as to why they aren't a standard RMR thread pitch. Now, we can make excuses as to why this is, especially considering the date in which this plate was originally conceived. But the fact of the matter is that there is no real reason for it. All you really have to do is adjust the thread pitch of the posts that go into your plates and the problem is solved. And the reason why I call it a problem is that now there are optics that are quite good that do require standard Trijicon thread pitch, for instance like the RCR, which I genuinely wish that I could just mount to this thing, but I can't because of this very dimension issue. Now the plate design in and of itself is actually really good. I appreciate how it digs into the slide, I appreciate how everything mounts up, and I definitely appreciate the simple fact that the mating surfaces themselves were machined quite well. However, what I do not appreciate, and this is going to come up quite a bit for a little while in this video, is the assembly team at Langdon Tactical. Now, I'm not going to pull any punches here because a custom shop is judged by its ability to execute, much like my job is judged exclusively on my ability to execute. And if there is a failing in that execution, your customer service needs to be top tier, especially for the nature of a custom shop. So I'm not going to pull any punches here, mostly because I respect Ernest Langdon, and I'm going to say how it is, because the assembly team in this shop is incompetent. The plate itself was fastened with the 3 proper screws, obviously, and they were even witness marked, but they were not anywhere close to the required amount of torque to keep them secured into place. The reason I know this is that once installed with proper torque, the witness marks in and of themselves went a further 2 o'clock to 2:30 of the original witness mark, which as far as inch pounds are concerned is quite a lot. In addition to this, when I pulled the 3 screws securing the optic plate to the slide, I noticed that a blue Loctite paste that was applied to 1/2 of the screw threads was used. And I'll just say this, as long as I've been doing this, and as long as anyone that's been doing this can figure, including the viewer of this video, that method has never, ever, ever worked when it comes to securing screws to anything. It doesn't matter if it's a short grip on a rifle. I have never seen this work, and the simple fact that a custom shop is doing this to optics plates is incredibly incompetent. Never mind the fact that there was just no real torque value on the screws whatsoever, because the optic plate came loose in under 500 rounds. And while we're on stuff coming loose, inside of 1100 rounds, the front sight decided it was going to shake itself free of the dovetail as well. Now, when a dovetailed iron sight shakes itself free in just barely over 1,000 rounds, the number one fear that somebody like me has is that, oh god, the front sight is underdimensioned, whoever installed it made it undersized. And upon inspection of this front sight, meaning after I'd removed it and started to put it back into place, I could push it with my thumb most of the way back into the dovetail, which means on its own, this thing is never going to stay in place. The front sight is in fact undersized. And of course, once removed, we noticed that there was nothing in the way of green Loctite, there was no staking of any sort, there wasn't even really finish rub on the slide itself, which suggests that undersized front sights are being used in mass because it takes no effort to press them into place. And I have to reiterate this, for a custom shop, this is nonsense. But keeping my emotions under control, we simply sent an email to Langdon Tactical at the address that's listed on the website, that is contact@Langdon Tactical, to find out that this email is not active. Why do you even have this on your website if it's not active? And after some searching, we found a second email that we could send something to. This time it's the sales email. We sent an email with the description of our issues, and now we're announcing ourselves like, hey, it's my company contacting your company, I have some issues with your gun, with of course the necessary images attached to said email, only to never be replied to in the first place. Now, at this point, you gotta understand where my brain is at here. Once you finish up with taxes and transfer fees and all that stuff, this thing is $1,500, and that's of the most basic packages, okay? I didn't ask for anything special, I just asked for the trigger job, an iron sight to the rear plate, and then called it. That's all I wanted. And again, as far as a custom shop shop is concerned, on the most fundamental levels, everything is wrong. Because the installation team does not know how to install any of these components, and that's quite clear at this point. And whoever is leading customer service at Langdon Tactical needs to find a new occupation. Because to even have an email on your website that is not active is absolutely ridiculous. Never mind just straight up not responding to people when they send you stuff. Going further on this, I'm beginning to learn through you guys that this isn't an isolated incident. Langdon Tactical has a history of blaming installation issues, of blaming non-functional guns, and in general handling their customer base that has issues with their guns that they themselves create very poorly. And by very poorly, a specific story comes to mind where they essentially blamed the guy for all of the issues that he was having with a particular PX4. Now, I'll leave a link in the description to this guy's full video because it's very interesting, and I'll also put a button up right here because as far as the regular gun buying populace is concerned, this is beginning to get quite annoying. Because look, I'll say this, Palmetto State Armory can't assemble a friggin' gun either, but at least their customer service responds to people, refunds stuff, exchanges things. They'll at least try and figure out what's wrong with your friggin' piece so that you can move on with your life. Thankfully, my secondary MOS is 91 Fox, small arms artillery repair is in the title, and Berettas are quite easy to mess with, so I was able to fix the problems that they provided me very easily. The next issue that I had with this gun, albeit significantly more minor than everything I just talked about, was honestly with their grips. These pieces of crap right here are the worst kind of useless, because not only do they not stick in the hand very hard, these little raised guys right here have a tendency to find just one spot of your hand and rub on it because the rest of the grip panel is essentially useless, which is awesome because all it really results in is my hand being annoyed at the fact that I have to grip the gun harder and I'm feeling mildly sharp things in like one spot of my hand. And maybe this is because I'm a Glock guy that has molested every Glock I've ever owned with a wood burning kit, but there is a real difference between grip texture that actually sticks in your hand, grabs you, and won't let go, and superficial grip texture that likes to hotspot or likes to simply not exist when it's 1,000 degrees outside and your hands are wet, or not exist at all when it rains. But that problem was pretty quickly fixed because I went to lock grips and I got a set of full checkered grips, simply because the texturing on these is very, very similar to the wraparound grip texture on an M9A4, which honestly I prefer over both. That said though, Lock Grips makes a fine product, and the grip panels that I got to replace these hunks of junk are exactly right as far as grip texture. They stick in the hand real good, they don't hotspot in individual places, and the gun doesn't try to move around on you while you're trying to grip the gun properly, which means I can properly apply my leverage and friction, not have to think about it at all, and only have to think about the shooting part. So that was a pretty rocky 1,100 rounds, but now that all the stuff is fixed on this, how'd the rest of it go? Well, the quickest way to describe this is to talk about the trigger. Now, I will say, the components that are in a trigger job in a bag, which is something that Langdon Tactical independently sells, but also includes in the entire firearms that they sell, is quite nice. If you were to directly compare this to an M9A4, the easiest way to describe this is that you can tell that everything is just a little bit smoother. The double action pull is a little bit lighter. The single action reset is a bit shorter, and how the hammer actually falls is just a little bit smoother. And if you were to directly compare one to the other, you can feel a slight step off in when the trigger actually breaks on an M9A4, and that simply is not here on the 92 Elite. So great, we found our first thing in this system that was just turnkey and worked great straight out the box. That wasn't inherent to the Vertex slide or the M9A1 frame. So good job, we got one. Also, about 3,000 rounds into this individual test, I decided I was going to go ahead and get a ported barrel from Langdon Tactical as well. Now, I do actually quite like this ported barrel. They don't use enormous ports, and the way that the ports are specifically cut allows for the redirected gases a little more surface area to act upon, so you don't have to steal enormous amounts of energy to keep the gun tracking nice and flat. In addition to this, you don't have to drop spring weight or anything like that either, and the gun functions normally, even with 115 grain target ammunition, which the Beretta was never designed for in the first place. It was designed for 124 grain NATO. And I quite like this. This is a turnkey barrel porting job that works really good, handles defense loads exactly as a ported barrel should, and doesn't make the overall system suffer. What's kind of funny about this too is that because the action is slowing down a little bit, an unintentional added benefit to this is that the action is in fact moving a little bit slower. So the overall wear on the system is less per shot. And I say all that to say this. There are some people that look at the weight on the M9 or 92 series handguns and say porting such a handgun is absolutely useless because the gun tracks really flat. They also add really stupid things in like, oh, try shooting in an enclosed space, or try shooting at retention, because shooting within retention is going to get jacket fragments embedded into your eye holes, and if you shoot in an enclosed space, the jacket fragments from those ports are again going to pinball around inside that enclosed space like a car and get in your eye holes. Or you shouldn't shoot with ports because if it's dark, you'll blind yourself, and if you're in owl vision time, they'll extra blind you or make the tube that you're wearing turn off. And every single opinion about this is stupid or lies, and let's explain why. Now, as far as the jacket fragments flying out of the individual ports themselves, yeah, that can happen, especially with really cheap 115 grain ammunition, and yes, they can hurt you. But as far as enclosed spaces are concerned, the gun is away from you. And if you're shooting from inside to outside of a car, what's going to irritate you way faster than the possibility of some pinballing jacket fragments, which are going into the ceiling at this point, is the broken and exploding glass. Never mind the fact that, again, gun is over here. And as far as retention position shooting is concerned, rotate the gun away from you, idiot, because if you try and shoot from retention like so, eventually, especially if you're rolling around on the ground with a person, if you try and shoot from a position like that, one, if you try to shoot like that from a position like this, they're gonna just grab you, not let go, and fold your clothes with you still inside them. And number two, if we shoot from this position ever against actual adversary, training environment or not, eventually the action is going to cycle itself into your chest. You're gonna create a stoppage at a really inopportune moment, and now this guy is real pissed. So as far as individual safety is concerned, ported guns are not a problem, you're just a moron. In addition to this, as far as flash is concerned, anybody that's actually shot guns outside will notice that the super dull flash that comes out the top end of a gun, as far as your perspective to what is actually being seen right in front of you, is the difference between it and just a regular pistol barrel is nearly identical, because you still get a fireball out front of the thing. Never mind the fact that if there is something so close to me that I need to shoot it right now and I don't have time to turn on a gun light, I'm really not worried about flash. And also, the very instant that a flashlight comes on, it basically washes out that flash. You barely notice that it's there in the first place because I am focused over there, shooting at that guy over there. And as far as vision is concerned, fun fact, all pistols flash a whole lot under vision. You need to just get used to it, and this is no different. Now, I sidetracked this whole thing to talk about ports and all the dumb shit that people say about it, primarily to say, in the full-size configuration of 92 style gun, if you're gonna do anything revolving around felt or mechanical recoil impulse reduction, I would suggest a ported barrel, because the muzzle velocity that you experience is not gonna drop you worse than like a 4-inch barreled gun is, like a Glock 19s, for instance. Larger guns have a tendency to have a Kerchunk style recoil impulse, and the fact that this still has it, even if it's much flatter than, for instance, a 5-inch 9mm 1911, it is still in fact there. So deleting a little bit of that felt impulse and slowing down the action just a tick actually helps get you onto target significantly faster. And when you have hotter ammunition like defense loads, like for instance the defense loads that we used in testing on this, which was, by the way, 50 rounds of 147 grain Spear Gold Dot and 124 grain Hornady with a similar loading to 124 NATO. It's just now a JHP. The gun now shoots extra flat. It just snaps just a little bit harder because of the slide speed increase. Now, the only reason for the tangent into ported barrels and stupid things that people say about them is that if I just recommend that this be my favorite upgrade of the pistol in general, I'm going to get people making dumbass comments like this, and I should probably just head them off, because people that don't shoot will always always talk like they do. And yes, you heard right, the ported barrel on this is my favorite upgrade on this pistol. Now, why is it not the trigger? Well, the reason is very simple. I learned how an M9A4 trigger works. Now, backing up just a little bit, is the Langdon Tactical trigger objectively better than an M9A4's? Yes, it in fact is objectively better. It's most noticed as better when you're not shooting the thing because you're paying the most attention, because I'm not thinking about other things like making sure that my gun track's flat, that I'm actually hitting what I'm shooting at, tracking targets, making sure that I negotiate my body correctly, things like that. In practice though, the difference between an M9A4 trigger and a Langdon Tactical trigger is, and I might be the one person on the internet to say this, but it is just the truth, not that much. The difference between essentially a 92X or an M9A4 trigger and a Langdon Tactical trigger, to me, in practice, is just not all that huge, because there is no real spike in difficulty at hitting things half a football field to a football field away between the two different guns. There just isn't. And as far as shooting fast is concerned, yes, in single action, the Langdon Tactical gun is in fact better, but we're talking about a reset that's 2mm versus a reset that's 3, maybe 3.5mm. It's not that different. So one's ability to shoot both guns incredibly well is really not dictated at all by one trigger or the other. And it certainly isn't the big deal that most people make it out to be. Now, maybe this is because I do a lot of shooting. Maybe this is because both of these reviews actually fired 6,000 rounds through both of these guns. But in all honesty, if I was to make a big trigger upgrade to either one of these guns, and yeah, I had already bought the shoe, that upgrade would be with the shoe shape itself. Now, the traditional hook style trigger shoe on both of these guns, especially for someone that shot a lot of Glocks, can kind of be a pain in the ass. Now, is it a gigantic deal? No, but I do notice that on occasion when I'm shooting the thing right-handed, especially if I'm trying to shoot the thing from double to single action quickly and effectively, I have a tendency to overhook the trigger shoe itself when I'm trying to move faster in single action from double action. Now, like I said in my M9A4 review, the difference in impacts versus point of aim has a tendency on occasion to go from the actual heart area, which is center of chest right at nip line, to roundabout soloplex area. But I have noticed me physically pulling on the shape of the shoe, which results in this sort of stuff. So the primary trigger upgrade that I would make to these guns is something I've already ordered, and that's the Volker flat trigger shoe, which angles itself in such a way to where at single action, the position of the shoe is essentially straight or vertical. Now, this isn't the wildest idea ever. Beretta has essentially figured out the same thing because they do that with their Performance Series guns, and a lot of other people have figured out the same stuff. The Beretta APX trigger shoe is straight, and a lot of Glock aftermarket triggers are the same way. The RXM trigger shoe is very, very similar to an Apex, so this isn't a huge revelation. But realistically speaking, if you actually train, if you shoot well, the trigger kit in the LTT is really not that big of a deal. It's nice, to be sure, and while the M9A4 trigger, especially in single action, will rival any production 2011 that's out, the Langdon Tactical trigger is straight up better than most 2011s. But there is a difference between what one feels versus what reality is, and the simple fact of the matter is, again, it's just not as good as people are trying to make it out to be. It's nice, but it's not magic. And now that we've talked about the feature set on this pistol and a variety of things that I've had to say about it, how did it actually perform over the course of this 6,000 round test? Now, over the course of this 6,000 rounds, I will say, on the reliability side of the house, I will go ahead and lead off with this first because there isn't all that much to report, frankly. In this 6,000 round test, we also had 100 self-defense rounds that were embedded into that 6,000 rounds, and it did just fine in that regard. As far as overall reliability is concerned, the rest of the ammunition fired was MagTech 115 grain, which is, as far as ammunition goes, kinda underpowered range trash that's affordable, because that's how you do this sort of thing. Because I'm just not interested in spending the money on 124 grain NATO for all of my tests. That said, because of the design nature of the pistol, and because of the action type, and because at the end of the day, this is a Beretta 92 style handgun, I did not have really any problems with it whatsoever. Matter of fact, as far as this ammunition is concerned, you could argue that it's more reliable than my Glocks, because typically speaking, I have a few more failures to fire here and there. I just simply don't think much of it, because that's the nature of striker-fired guns and range trash. That said, Beretta was onto something making this hammer-fired gun, because I had a single failure to fire that once chambered again, and I attempted to fire it, would not actually fire, so I could sort of write that off as a single bad primer in 6,000 rounds, which is interesting, because I typically get a few more of those. There were 0 failures to extract, which makes perfect sense because of the simple action type, and then there were 4 failures to feed. Now, you could very easily write these off as well, because I believe this to be caused by the magazines that were used. Now, I had 22 magazines that were being used throughout this testing process. There's some much older stuff, like there's a few contract magazines that are almost as old as the war they fought, mixed in with some medium-used Beretta and Metgar stuff, as well as 10 magazines that I essentially just bought. These are only a couple months old. And every time that I had some sort of issue, it was from these much older magazines. So you could pretty easily write those off as a non-issue as well, but stats are stats, stoppages are stoppages, I figured I'd report them. Other than that, even with a ported barrel, there was basically no issues to speak of. As far as performance of the gun itself, once its issues were resolved after its first 1,100 rounds, and especially once its ported barrel was installed, because if I didn't mention it, I just bought a second barrel that was ported rather than sending in a barrel to be ported. I figured that if I was going to go this route, I might as well just have a backup that's stock standard. But again, once its issues were worked out, now this is an outstanding pistol. Now that I've got the lock grips in it, and especially with the ported barrel that's in there, I can be truly aggressive with this thing. And frankly, it's one of those guns that you don't really realize how truly good it really is until you start holding yourself hostage in the film room. Because yeah, while I do some filming and stuff for you guys, and while occasionally I like to have some fun here and there, outside of 1 or 2 instances here and there, every round that I fire, I'm training in. Dude, like, I'm trying to get my target transitions drilled to death. I'm trying to get my one-handed stuff in there. I'm trying to handle my transitions, both with either of my hands and from target to target. I'm trying to handle different shot sets to see if I can keep track of it in my head. And of course, yeah, it's YouTube. What you guys see is the highlights, because duh. But the vast majority of the shooting that I do in these instances is the boring stuff. It's the difficult stuff. It's holding yourself to scoring metrics and timetables and things like that. And what I noticed is that whether it's concealed or gun belted or whatever, the default position for this handgun, now that all of its issues are worked out, is aggressive. It doesn't really matter what hand I use. It doesn't really matter what posture I'm in. Because of the sum of its total parts, your ability to be incredibly aggressive with this handgun is almost always maximized, and I really do appreciate that. You know, some people would balk or take a long time in order to fire a shot at a paint can that was stood up on the mount for a steel plate, which is essentially a paint can sized hostage taker at 40 friggin' yards. But in this particular case, I had to take 2 different takes because we both knew that it was going to take the camera a second to focus from 1 to 10x, and the first time that we shot this footage, she got kind of pissed off at me because I didn't give the camera time to focus, so we had to do it again. But the take count for these 2 targets was 2. 1 shot each. It really was not all that hard. So hitting a whole C-zone size plate is incredibly easy. So the first thing that you run into as far as roadblocks in your progression is having way more confidence than skill, in which you are moving way too fast and getting your head way over your skis, to the point where the limitation now is how much exactly should I dial it back. And now I'm in this constant battle between going as hard as I can and as clean as I can, if that makes sense, versus other guns that I've used in the past, whereas the general feeling, and I know that that term is really spurious, but the general feeling that I've always had in the past with striker-fired guns or 1911s or 2011s or whatever is more or less self-aware of mediocre skill level, versus with this thing, someone's confidence level could be driven to such a point where you think you can cut God. And of course, that isn't the case. So again, once its issues were sorted out, and once we basically figured out that as far as Langdon Tactical customer service is concerned, that we're on our own. The thing is exactly as you would expect, a souped up Beretta 92. But after all this talking on this particular subject, one question really should be lingering in the back of your mind, and that is going to Langdon Tactical for this actually worth it? No, it really isn't, like at all. Now, before I say something that bold, I really do have to explain myself. This isn't just because they can't be trusted to assemble really simple things, although that's a big part of it. This isn't just because their customer service is pretty fucking dog shit, because it is. And this isn't just factoring in cost of all this stuff when you compare doing it yourself, which, by the way, doing it yourself is not all that hard at all. And this isn't just because once you get an RDO from Langdon Tactical, you now have to use their internal parts, but it's in fact because of all of those things. Why would I spend more money questioning the work that you do, knowing that if I contact your customer service, they're going to try and make it my fault, and understanding that once I get one of your RDO pistols, I'm not going to use the internals for every other M9 that's on the planet, and frankly, there are just more of them. So in reality, let's go ahead and price it out. Now, if I put too much of this on the screen, YouTube's going to flag this as me trying to sell you guns, so you're gonna have to friggin' write this down at home. But for those of you that are interested in a super solid 92, start writing this down. Now, when you start something like this, and when you've had a couple of experiences, you always ask the question, how would I do this again? And having shot a Centurion-sized M9A4, which is essentially a Commander-sized 92, I can say that that thing snaps on a target just a little bit faster. So if I were to do this all over again, I would start with the M9A4 Centurion, which again is a full-sized frame on a shorter slide. Now, don't get this confused. This is not compatible with a full-size gun. You can't just get a Centurion slide and slap it on a full-size frame. They're actually built slightly different. But let's start there. If you shop poorly, a Centurion M9A4 is $1,100, so we'll just start there. If you go with a D-La plate, which mounts up to an M9A4 slide just fine, that's $145. Go with a set of D-La backup irons, which are really just a set of Beretta irons that have been milled to properly fit behind optics. That's $88. A Parker mountain machine compensator is $100, and that just makes it full-size length now, so get a full-sized holster. And let's say that you wanted a trigger job in a bag from Langdon Tactical. Fine, that's $215. I personally don't think it's that big of a deal, but if you think it is, okay, fair enough. But whether or not the trigger job in a bag is added, Volker flat trigger shoe is $98. And personally, I would just take that over the trigger job in a bag, because again, the M9A4 trigger is not anywhere close to bad enough to justify the trigger job in a bag. But if, again, you included all these things, you're at $1,746, and I just go ahead and round up to $1,800, and depending on like taxes, transfer fees, things like that, you may end up with a little bit more. Point is, you're around $1,800. Doing the same sort of math, and this is generalized paintbrush type stuff, there are people that can shop better than this for an M9A4, but whatever, let's just say that we're going straight to a website here, and we're picking up a Langdon Tactical 92 that's Centurion sized. Okay, with no extra frills, that's $1,400. Again, we're not talking about taxes or transfer fees yet. Regardless of gun type, I'm just gonna recommend the flat trigger shoe, so that's another $98. A ported barrel from them is $356 if you buy that separately, which I would just suggest. It's nice to have a backup barrel. A set of lock grips, because the grips that they come with are terrible, that's $65. And the total of this is $1,919. We start talking about taxes and transfer fees and things like that, and we're probably around $2K. Once everything's done, of course. Now again, just like the 1,800 figure, this 2,000 figure is high or low. It depends on a variety of things, but that's more or less your neighborhood. Oh, and once you get the gun, you're just gonna have to make sure that your front sight is properly installed by probably removing it yourself and then reinstalling it. And oh, by the way, you might as well just undo the screws from the optic plate, because I promise you that they are very likely not properly mounted up, which again is annoying. But let's say that you don't want the ported barrel for the Langdon Tactical Centurion. Surely, the barrel porting is more expensive than just getting a threaded barrel and a Parker mountain machine compensator, and you're wrong, because it's slightly more expensive. The first set of figures that I gave you is for $1,919. Instead of going the ported barrel route, going the compensator route actually brings you to $1,943. So again, we're in the same neighborhood of round about $2K-ish once we start talking about transfer fees, taxes, all that junk, and of course shipping costs for all this stuff. But more or less, that is your neighborhood. So the reality of the matter is that if you just did this yourself, you make it get out of it cheaper regardless. And before anyone says that I forgot anything, I didn't add lock grips to the Centurion because the wraparound grips for the M9A4 are superb anyway. So that's just a fact of the matter, is that you could have a gun that performs exactly to your taste and liking without reliability problems. All you have to do is a little bit of assembly yourself, a little bit of shopping yourself, and make some smart decisions. And you have a gun that meets or exceeds what it is that they are trying to do. And here's the other thing that really kind of annoys me, because I've heard a lot of people talking about initial fit and finish of Langdon Tactical 92s because, man, they just seem so much more solid and they're not rattling and there's no movement in the slide and frame, and God, they just fit them so good. I don't understand what kind of magic they're putting into these guns. And the answer to that actually comes from Langdon Tactical themselves, and it's not magic, it's actually a lack of work, because they don't test fire any of the guns that they send out initially, and they don't pre-cycle them for fitment either. Now, pre-cycling is taking an assembled gun, hooking it up to a machine, and having that machine cycle the gun a bunch of times dry so it can shave away excesses and things like finish, make sure everything is polished up as far as fitment is concerned. And the reality of the matter is that the shipped gun is a gun that's basically guaranteed to be reliable, because from the Beretta factory, they test fire them all and they pre-cycle them all. So as far as individual directions are concerned, as far as craftsmanship even, look, I know Ernest Langdon has poured a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and man hours into making the RDO a fantastic handgun, mating up a Vertex slide with an M9A1 frame, all the research required in making these parts better, all the passion that you had to deliver into an individual design, and convincing the entire world that the M9 is still a viable product. And that's why I hate making a review like this, because I have to speak directly to this man and tell him that the people that are running the show right now are killing you. Because at present, today, I have to say that Langdon Tactical, as they exist at present, especially with all of the nonsense they put their customers through on a regular basis, because good lord, some of the horror shows that people have sent me with picture evidence of things like USPs that have been butchered up is nothing short of absolutely ridiculous. And if these people didn't already have the reputation that Langdon himself had created for this company, this custom shop would have been out of business quite a few years ago. And it brings suspicion to YouTubers and stuff when people start talking about hand select products, because that's absolutely a thing that companies do to try and impress the wider world, just to go down in flames, because when they start receiving orders, they can't fulfill them because they don't know how to properly assemble machines. And I know no one is going to listen to this video, especially not Langdon himself, because I'm not a gigantic YouTuber with millions of followers and things like that. But if I had an opportunity to speak to the man himself, I would have to say these guys are you. Because eventually, world at large is gonna get wise to the fact that these guys have been cutting a shitload of corners, and someone like me, who's gonna put 40,000 rounds on a pistol a year, and is gonna run through truckloads of ammunition because I'm testing products, and teaching classes, and handing my guns to people. What really sucks to say, because I've seen earlier Langdon pistols before just run themselves into the ground, and refuse to stop because the quality of craftsmanship was through the roof. It really sucks to say that with the stuff that's available in the wider world right now, especially with the stuff that Beretta is releasing at present, and what other guys are putting out themselves, there is no reason, especially with your customer service and assembly team, there is no reason for anyone to pick up a Langdon Tactical product. And there is no reason for me to recommend your products to people, simply because if I were to do that, I have no idea what quality product that person is receiving if they place an order. The only thing that I could possibly do for guys now is talk to them about how to their current situation with the gun you've already sold them. So it sucks, man. It really, really sucks, because I really wish that I could have just shilled for this product and sang their praises. It would have been much easier. It's way easier to make YouTube friends or whatever by doing it. But I also do this with the perfect understanding that I teach classes regularly. And if I make recommendations to people, it is very likely that that recommendation could end up in combat. And no, we're not talking about faraway land D-boy stuff, you nerds. I'm talking about the line cook that's just trying to come home from work, that lives in a rough neighborhood and has to get this guy off him that won't stop. I have to think about that guy, because it's clear at this point that guys at this shop are not. Well, that sucked, but that's all I got, guys. If you'd like to come out and train with us, you can absolutely do that. The open enrollment stuff that's on the schedule is scheduled through December at present. We're getting ready to add a whole bunch of stuff to it, so stay tuned to that, especially as we begin to close on Black Friday. And I know I say begin to close as if it's right around the corner, but you know what, guys have to save up money for things like that. If you'd like to support us through Patreon, you can absolutely do that as well. If you'd like to get something out of it, $41 a month gets you as much open enrollment training as you would like, so long as it isn't a logistically challenging class, like a soft skin vehicle class, for instance, or a private class for fairly obvious reasons. If you are a teacher or a school resource officer, you can find my email on my website, and if you want to provide me some credentials and would also like to train with us, I don't charge you guys ever. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and do those things. And if you'd like to track our social media stuff, links for all of that, including the new Discord that we opened, are in the description below. And remember, guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.